Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. It is what we make out of what we have, not what we are given, that separates one person from another. Tread softly, breathe peacefully, laugh hysterically. We owe our children, the most vulnerable citizens in any society, a life free from violence and fear. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. When a man is denied the right to live the life he believes in, he has no choice but to become an outlaw. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death. A good head and good heart are always a formidable combination, but when you add to that a literate tongue or pen, then you have something very special. It always seems impossible until it's done. I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. To be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. There is nothing like returning to a place that remains unchanged, to find the ways in which you yourself have altered. Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up. Lead from the back and let others believe they are in front. I am not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying. There is no passion to be found playing small and settling for a life that is less than one you are capable of living. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. You can never have an impact on society if you have not changed yourself. Great peacemakers are all people of integrity, of honesty, but humility. Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity. It is an act of justice. As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. It is said that no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones. May your choices reflect your hopes. not your fears. A winner is a dreamer who never gives up.
Do you know what it really means to be brave? I can tell you. It takes heart and a people who, after failing once, twice, many times, to stop, get up and try again. It takes a leader who says, we will rise from the ashes and try again. Who put his people, their freedom and the country's democracy first. What does it mean to be brave? It means being open to opportunities and overcoming the fear of exposure. It's brave to focus on more than just the tangible. Bravery, it's not about shouting loudly and making bold moves. It's about continuity. To prove time and again that we have what it takes, that we're a force to be reckoned with. But it's not enough to only acknowledge our faults. We have to be brave enough to intentionally address them.
This is the year in which we will turn the tide on corruption.
Because it takes bravery to keep going, to keep growing. It takes bravery to take a stand in the midst of a revolution, to take a leap of faith in a climate of opportunity, and stand at the ready for what the future might bring. To welcome those who push the boundaries, and being open to the unknown, because it takes bravery to realize potential. What I'm trying to say is that it's bravery that makes all the difference. Invest in South Africa, the brave future.
Wouldn't you like to explore a country where two worlds intersect, where first world infrastructure meets an emerging market, where science and technology enjoy rapid advancement, a land where innovation creates a dynamic environment for growth, where a market of almost 60 million people provide you with the perfect springboard to access a continent of 1.3 billion people? Welcome to the future. Invest in South Africa.
Ten reasons why you should invest in South Africa. Number 1, hot emerging market. Number 2, the number 1 diversified economy in Africa. Number 3, the largest presence of multinationals on the African continent. Number 4, progressive constitution and independent judiciary. Number 5, favorable market access to global markets. Number 6, abundant natural resources. Number 7, advanced financial services and banking sector. Number 8, world-class infrastructure and logistics. Number 9, young, trainable labor force. And number 10, excellent quality of life.
We invite you to a place in Africa that is like no other, the cradle of civilization, the genesis of humankind, where it all began. where new ways of doing business happen every day, and where the world watches our talent in fascination. A place where Nobel Prize winners have inspired a new generation of winners who are leaving their mark on global stages. We invite you to a place that celebrates diversity, culture, and heritage. The only country in the world that is as colorful as the rainbow, where humanity is expressed through our blend of 11 official languages. Headquarters to top South African and international investment banks, financial and legal consultants. Come set foot in the richest square mile in Africa and host your business events at one of the largest convention centers on the continent. Growth is everywhere. South Africa is rich in mineral resources and manufacturing expertise. We embrace global innovation and technological trends. With an array of world-class infrastructure, everyone is invited to do business. Visit, explore.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome. In July, South Africa celebrates former President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela's birthday. And as a result, 18th July has been declared as Nelson Mandela International Day. But as South Africans, we embrace the chance to celebrate Nelson Mandela's life for the whole of July. This gives everyone the opportunity to heed the call to action for people to recognize their individual power to make an imprint and to change the world around them. The theme for 2022 is do what you can with what you have where you are. A global movement for positive change begins with small actions. As each person acts, they fuel momentum towards positive change, raising awareness and expanding the reach of Nelson Mandela's values, that of fighting justice, helping people in need, and practicing reconciliation. In November 2009, in recognition of the former South African president's contribution to the culture of peace and freedom, the United Nations General Assembly declared the 18th of July Nelson Mandela International Day. The United Nations resolution recognizes Nelson Mandela's values and his dedication to the service of humanity. In conflict resolution, in race relations, the promotion and protection of human rights, reconciliation, gender equality, and the rights of children and other vulnerable groups, in the fight against poverty and the promotion of social justice. The United Nations resolution acknowledges Nelson Mandela's contribution to the struggle for democracy internationally and the promotion of culture of peace throughout the world. So today, as Brand South Africa, in recognition of this day, we have partnered with the African Leadership Organization to have a discussion, ladies and gentlemen, on the theme, Leadership Through the Lens of Nelson Mandela, Lessons for Today's Global Environment. We have an esteemed set of speakers, and we also have a bonus surprise for you, because in addition to the speakers, we are going to have some respondents today who will digest what the speakers have said and reflect their own perspectives. So you are welcome to tell us your thoughts throughout the program. So type in the chat whatever comes into your mind. As a starting point, please type your favorite Nelson Mandela quote for us. Let's see that. Type in your favorite Nelson Mandela quote. There you go. So, ladies and gentlemen, the macroeconomic environment that we face is uniquely challenging, with rising interest rates, a food crisis, an energy crisis, and capital outflows from emerging markets. We have seen some of its early impacts in many countries across the world. So today is a good time to have a sobering and necessary conversation on means of protecting the most vulnerable economies and further avoiding further crisis. And so to kick off our discussions today, we are going to have an address by the managing editor of the African Leadership organization and African Leadership magazine, who is our strategic partner today. So the managing director is Mr. Kingsley Okeke. He's a media practitioner, and he has been managing and been a media practitioner for a number of years. Currently, he's formulating the media strategy for the African Leadership magazine's new markets, as well as leading the group in market penetrations. He's also the chief media consultant for the Center for the Economic and Leadership Development. He is also a global juror for Entrops, which is a Spain-based and European Union-funded organization for the promotion of sustainable business across the globe. So over to you, Mr. Kingsley Okeke, for you to give us your remarks.
Thank you very much, Pumela and Brown South Africa, for this wonderful, wonderful event and this conversation. Consistently over the years, Brown South Africa has marked the Nelson Mandela Day with thought-provoking conversation, and I'm sure this year's event won't be different. Again, I acknowledge the presence of the excellencies and distinguished guests, speakers, participants, as well as also our respondents who have joined us for this conversation today. Like I had acknowledged in an earlier meeting that I was having with a group of persons, that this conversation today is as important as it was many years ago, because some of the challenges, or most of the challenges that the great Nelson Mandela lived, fought and died for are still very well with us today. We talk about some of those prevailing challenges like injustice, inequality, poverty, peace and insecurity across the country. I mean, the world is faced with a menacing crisis currently in Ukraine, and the world is actually up it and looking for solutions on how to address that major challenge. Just recently, leaders in the West African sub-region gathered to discuss the issues around the rising cases of coup d'etat in the region and how to address same. These are most of the challenges that we will be faced with, around the continent, around the world, and the continent at large. Now, developing economies also, we've seen growing cases of poverty and inequality, and it is threatening the very fabric of our existence as a people. It therefore calls for a major introspection, like you had said, Pumela, earlier, and we need to rethink our strategies as leaders and how we may be failing past, present, and future leaders. For us at the African Leadership Magazine, we've been committed over the past decades to the promotion of the ideals that the great Nelson Mandela stands for. I mean, we have consistently looked for those leaders who are showcasing or who are promoting positive causes, and as well as also promoting Afro-positivism across the continent, to showcase them and tell the world that while we have some of the major challenges in the continent, there are also leaders that are contributing towards redefining the narrative coming out of the continent. Now, we have seen as a publication through the magazine and also the events that there are leaders who deserve also equal space and to be showcased globally because of what they stand for and in their promotion of the ideals of the great Madiba. Now, to put it simply and to summarize for us at the African Leadership Magazine, you can say that we've been consistently showcasing and looking and discovering, showcasing, and of course promoting the next Mandelas in business, the next Mandelas in politics, the next Mandelas in governance, because we believe that leadership makes all the difference. For some of us who know, when the term Third World was coined during the Cold War, it was to address those who are non-aligned to NATO, and those who are non-aligned, of course, also to the rest of to the communist bloc. But today, it is a phrase used to describe Africa and the other developing economies like Latin America, because we believe that if we get the leadership right, we perhaps would make all the change that is needed to move the continent from where it is and to the next level. But again, if we do not get it right, If we are to have the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth, the fifth world, Africa will still be part of it. So that is why we believe very strongly there is no better time than now for us to begin to rally around and have strong conversations that is geared towards changing our course as a people, as well as also contributing to the global discourse, as it were, in terms of as it relates to leadership. Now, Pumela, you had said earlier, you captured earlier about what the UN, how it marked July as a year, as an international day, month for the celebration of Nelson Mandela. But to put it in context, on the 24th of September in 2018, world leaders gathered, at the United Nations headquarters in New York for the Nelson Mandela Peace Summit. Now, at the summit, nearly 100 heads of state and government, ministers and members of cabinet were all very articulate in their position and what the Great Madiba stands for. They all mentioned, they all highlighted, most of the ideals that he stood for. And there was a commitment from that particular meeting that from 2019 to 2028, it will be described as the decade of peace in recognition of the contribution of the Great Madiba to the sustenance of peace across the world. Now, it is up to us to look at what we have seen in the past couple of months since 2018, since 2018 to today. If we have made any concerted effort towards, of course, changing the course of the world and the continent at large. That question is left for every one of us to answer, because as you will agree with me, there has been rising cases of issues across the world, even as we march towards 2028. We need to ask ourselves that important question: where would we have been where would we be if we had, of course, imbibed the legacies and the leadership lessons that we have learned as a people from the Great Madiba? As I conclude, I'll leave us with a quote from the first, democratically elected president of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta, when he said that our children will talk of the heroes past, but how would we be described? We will be described as, are we going to be described as the architects of the future? That is a great question that I will leave with us as we continue this important conversation that is designed to help us find and do course correction as we march forward towards a greater world. Thank you, and do have a wonderful deliberation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kingsley Okeke. I like how you talk about Afro-positivism and how you also talk about how you profile, those individuals who have Nelson Mandela-like qualities. So thank you for your contribution. Thank you. I'm now going to introduce, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker, which is Baroness Verma. And she is going to share with us her perspectives on leadership through the lens of Nelson Mandela, and what lessons can we draw for today's global environment. Baroness Verma has served as the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State at the Department of International Development from May 2015 until July 2016. She has been a conservative member of the House of Lords since 2000 and previously served as Parliamentary Undersecretary. She attended local schools and university in Leicester, and in 2006, she was raised to the peerage as Baroness Verma of Leicester in the county of Leicestershire. She was the opposition whip from 2006 to 2010, and then government whip following the 2010 general election. So prior to becoming Parliamentary Undersecretary of State, Baroness Verma was spokesperson for Cabinet Office, International Development, Women and Equalities and Business Innovation Skills. Baroness Verma started her first business, interestingly, at the age of 19 in high fashion, ladies and gentlemen, supplying high street multiples. In the year 2000, she changed her business to the service sector. And she was born in Punjab in India and moved to the UK with her parents when she was 1 year old. She lives in Leicester with her husband and her daughter and a son. Baroness, we actually have a common connection that you may not be aware of. I was awarded a scholarship by Utatu Nelson Mandela to study in the United Kingdom, and I actually studied in the University of Leicester. So I can say that Leicester was my home for the duration of my studies. Let me hand over to you to address us, Baroness, on your perspectives on leadership through the lens of Nelson Mandela, and what lessons can you be utilized for today's environment globally? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela, and thank you to Brand South Africa, and actually a very big thank you to Kingsley on his opening remarks and your remarks, how you've set the tone for the discussions today. And, you know, looking at all of the quotes that were presented by the great Nelson Mandela, President Nelson Mandela, one of my favorite ones that I always love to talk to people about is the one where he says, and I quote, "I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not the one who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear." And I think that really does sum up a lot of what Africa as a continent is doing today. And I compared that to a quote that as a British Indian, with the history of the fight for freedom in India, of the great Mahatma Gandhi, when he said in his quote, "The greatest glory in living lies not in ever falling, but in rising every time we fall." And I think that sums up exactly the sort of resilience that people in developing nations, in the Indian subcontinent, have as a great strength. Compare that to a quote that is impacting on the world today because of the way a leader in a country has invaded another country, and that's Putin. And he's got a quote that says, "Nobody should ever have any illusion about the possibility of gaining military superiority over Russia. We will never allow this to happen." And instead of talking about peace and talking about humility, we have got a tone of aggression. And I think that sort of sums up to me where the difference lay between great leaders that will be remembered forever, not just in today's world, but in the worlds that will come after us, about how great leadership unifies, unites people, brings people together, is a diversity of thoughts, a diverse collection of people being able to share different views and looking at the outcomes as the benefit for all. And I think, you know, when we talk about leadership through the lens of the great Nelson Mandela, one of the things that I think we mustn't forget, and it's recent events actually, the event of COVID. The event of COVID taught us that unless everybody was safe, nobody was safe. And yet we witnessed globally how so many poor countries, so many people in poverty were left out of the great speed in getting vaccinations out. But that did not deter those countries from actually looking at their own solutions. And I feel that that was a turning point for many people to realize that they have the strength in their own hands. And if they've got good leadership, strong leadership, and confidence in what they themselves can deliver for their people and for people beyond their own borders, then that starts to become a discussion of self-assurance, of collaboration, of looking at what your humankind dividends provide for you. The world is split into two, where the Western world is an aging population and where the developing world has a dividend of young people. And so we can't ignore the fact that at some point there is always going to be that interdependency across those borders. So perhaps we should start to really revisit the way we look at how we exist side by side. You know, Nelson Mandela was a pioneer in his enduring the white minority rule in South Africa. And post-apartheid, he didn't come out with anger and with hate. He came out with reconciliation. He came out with wanting to build a country that came together, that looked at poverty, that looked at eradicating the people that had nothing to the people that had everything. Are we there today? Of course not. Is there a lot more to do? Of course there is. But how do we get that reconciliation to work across? Comes through leadership. And I always say to people when I'm in meetings is when we dream of something, the best thing is to make that dream a possibility by including other people's dreams into your dream. Because you having a single dream is not going to change the way the world exists. We still live far too much where those that have the levers of power make decisions that don't always include all of the population. And I think what we've got to learn, and if we learn anything from great leaders like Nelson Mandela, is the ability to reach out. We've got climate change problems going on. The biggest impact is on those that have the least ability to be able to build in resilience, to adapt, to be able to respond. Surely it is our own responsibilities to ensure that when we have those discussions, we demand at the table that this is not a conversation that excludes everybody. It includes everybody. We've got energy and food security issues today. They are not going to get any less. They're going to grow. Leadership is about making sure that we get everybody's input in. Look at the situation today. We have an invasion of a country and there is famine across the world. Surely that can't be right. Surely our resistance must be that as countries, we're self-sufficient, resilient, that we have an adaptation policy in place, and that leaders take on board that these issues are not going away, and that we really do need to make sure that we talk to everybody, we include everybody, and we challenge everything if it isn't right, including corruption, including bad practice, including poor leadership. Pamela, this is going to be a phenomenal discussion today, and I really do look forward to our other speakers. But I think the best quote I will finish on is this: it is not our diversity which divides us. It is not our ethnicity or culture or religion that divides us. There can only be one division amongst us between those who cherish democracy and those who do not. And I think that is a key point for us to embrace, to understand, and hopefully get good leadership to deliver on. Thank you so very much for having me here today on this really important debate, and congratulations and best wishes to everybody celebrating Nelson Mandela Day.
Thank you very much, Baroness, for such a profound reflection and the call to action that indicates that there's still a whole lot more that needs to be done, and you're emphasizing on the importance of leadership, as it were. So thank you very much for your perspective.
We invite you to a place in Africa that is like no other, the cradle of civilization, the genesis of humankind, where it all began, where new ways of doing business happen every day, and where the world watches our talent in fascination. A place where Nobel Prize winners have inspired a new generation of winners who are leaving their mark on global stages. We invite you to a place that celebrates diversity, culture, and heritage. The only country in the world that is as colorful as the rainbow, where humanity is expressed through our blend of 11 official languages. Headquarters to top South African and international investment banks, financial and legal consultants. Come set foot in the richest square mile in Africa and host your business events at one of the largest convention centers on the continent. Growth is everywhere. South Africa is rich in mineral resources and manufacturing expertise. We embrace global innovation and technological trends. With an array of world-class infrastructure, everyone is invited to do business. Visit, explore.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to go to our keynote speaker, and our keynote speaker is Lord Peter Hain. He was born in 1950 and brought up in South Africa. He has been in politics for 50 years. His South African-born parents, Adelaide and Walter, after being jailed and then banned for their anti-apartheid activism in Pretoria, were forced to leave for exile in London in March 1969 after the then government of South Africa prohibited all architectural firms from employing his father, Walter Hain. And at the age of 19, Peter became a British anti-apartheid leader, especially in stopping all white South African sports tours from 1969 onwards from South Africa. And in December 2015, Lord Peter Hain received from South Africa the O.R. Tambo National Award in Silver for his excellent contribution to the freedom struggle. And in 2018, he chaired the Nelson Mandela London Centenary Exhibition Organizing Committee in the United Kingdom. And in 2017, he chaired the Oliver Tambo Centenary Committee in the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Peter Hain has written a short readable biography titled Mandela, His Essential Life, published in 2018 in South Africa by Jonathan Ball. He's been the MP for Neath from 1991 to 2015, where he served in the Labour governments for Tony Blair and Gordon Brown for 12 years. And as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Lord Peter Hain negotiated an end to the conflict, bringing old enemies together in government in 2007. And in November 2015, he was introduced to the House of Lords. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, Lord Peter Hain.
Mela, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to do this and also to remember and honor a giant of our age. And I cannot think of a greater global icon than Nelson Mandela. Our family connection went back to the late 1950s when my mother and father, activists in the struggle, met Nelson Mandela and his comrades at the treason trial and took them lunch. And then my mother was the only white in the public gallery at his first trial after he'd been captured whilst on the run in the old synagogue in Pretoria, where she used to come to witness every day of his trial. I want to just concentrate on several key themes that seem to me to signify his greatness as a leader and the lessons that he can teach us all. First of all, his courage, not just in enduring and coming out stronger the long years in that tiny cell on Robben Island, but also his courage in facing the judge at the Rivonia trial in 1964 when he faced the death sentence. And he didn't, along with his colleagues, he didn't try to apologize for leading the underground campaign after the ANC had been banned. He stuck by his principles and he gave a very memorable speech, which many of you will know. But the fact is he faced the death sentence. And many people, many of us perhaps, would have sought to make a speech in mitigation to try and appeal to the judge to show clemency, because they all faced the death sentence, they all faced hanging by the neck. And yet he gave this defiant speech in which he said what his ideals were and that he'd continue to believe in them, and that if he had to die for them, then he'd accept that as well. Of course, we know that he was sentenced to life imprisonment instead. So his courage, even when his own life was threatened. The second characteristic of his leadership was his toughness. People always remark on his humanity, his generosity, his refusal to be vengeful in regard to his former oppressors, but he was also very tough. When President de Klerk was negotiating with Nelson Mandela, he was trying to build in a blocking mechanism for the white minority in the way the future constitutional structure of government and democracy would work in South Africa, effectively a kind of veto for the white minority. It was a very tough negotiation, and those who now criticize Nelson Mandela failed to recognize the historic situation in which he found himself and the ANC leadership found themselves as well. And he was very, very tough. He said, no, we will stick by our principles of one person, one vote, and a democracy that represented the will of the people. And of course, he won through on that, despite President de Klerk's security forces unleashing a wave of terror on grassroots ANC supporters. More people were killed in that period between Nelson Mandela coming out of prison and becoming president than at any time in apartheid's history, because the regime was seeking to both negotiate a transition. It realized it had to, or the country would collapse into civil war and economic decay and destitution. So it was negotiating with Nelson Mandela, but also it was trying to assert its power and kill many of his followers. So he showed great toughness and resolution in standing up for what he believed in and ultimately winning through. The next principle is determination. He stuck to his principles. For example, when he was courted by President Clinton in America, by Prime Minister Tony Blair, and many other leaders of the world who sought to praise him and be with him and be his friend, he nevertheless stuck to his allies during the long years of the struggle, and those allies were not to be found in the British government or the American government, but around elsewhere in the world. So he went to, for example, to greet President Castro in Cuba, because the Cubans had been very supportive of the anti-apartheid struggle, despite criticism from the Americans for doing so. He stuck to his principles, and he was not afraid to speak it as he saw it, including condemning the invasion of Iraq. And I remember taking a phone call when I was in government from Nelson Mandela, with whom I'd become privileged to become a close friend, saying how angry he was with Tony Blair over the impending invasion of Iraq and what a disaster it would be. And of course, in retrospect, how right he was. He was farsighted. He, in prison in those long decades on Robben Island, he worked out a negotiating strategy. He got to know his former oppressors, their language, the Afrikaans language, their history, their culture, so that when they came to him to negotiate, he was ready to do so, and he treated them as his equals and with respect to their own culture. So he had a very far-sighted vision as a leader. I also want to pick out a feature of his leadership and his toughness and his strength in distinguishing leadership from followership. A lot of leaders like to do what they think their party members, they think their staff members if they're in a business, they think their organizational grassroots if they're in an organization want to hear. But sometimes leadership requires not just listening to your followers, which is terribly important to do all the time, not just if you're a president listening to voters, but also leading. And I take as an example the 1995 Rugby World Cup final, when the Springboks were playing the All Blacks at Ellis Park in Johannesburg. And the nation was still at a difficult stage. The white minority had still not fully embraced the rainbow democracy that Nelson Mandela presided over. And his own advisors pleaded with him not to wear the Springbok jersey, not to wear the Springbok cap, because that was the emblem of apartheid on the sports fields of the world. And I remember that, as Pumela mentioned, I led campaigns to stop the Springboks from playing by interrupting the matches running onto the pitch at Twickenham and so on. So his advisors said, don't wear the Springbok jersey, when you receive the teams before the match as president of the country, but he ignored them. And he marched onto the pitch to greet the teams on behalf of South Africa and start the World Cup final, wearing the Springbok jersey and the cap. And the 99.9% white audience, many, many hostile to him, rose to their feet and chanted his name. And that was a very moving act of nation healing that he exhibited by exerting leadership, not just followership. He was also very honest, uncomfortably honest sometimes, even for his friends and his supporters. For example, he was very clear that the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, not looking only at crimes by the apartheid government and security forces and terrible torture and killings and terrorism and assassinations that they carried out, but also crimes by ANC members in the camps in Zambia and Tanzania and elsewhere in the struggle. And he said, no, the report on that must be published, even though very high leaders of the ANC didn't want it to be published. He was also very honest with President Mbeki in disagreeing about his policy on HIV/AIDS and speaking up for the sufferers and the victims and speaking the truth about that. And he told the truth as well about the corruption which enveloped South Africa under former President Zuma especially, and is still very present in the country. At the 1999 Mafeking ANC conference, for example, when Nelson Mandela presided over his party for the last time, he warned them of the dangers of corruption and greed and against careerism of politicians who use their positions to make money. And that's happened not just in South Africa, but across the world, including in Britain as well. And he was warning about that as he stepped down from president because he had seen it. And then in 2001, 2 years after his retirement, he said, little did we suspect that our own people, when they got a chance, would be as corrupt as the apartheid regime. That is one of the things that has really hurt us. His honesty, his directness, whatever the consequences or the criticisms in telling the truth and telling truth to power was something that I think was another of his immense characteristics as a leader, and which we can learn from in trying to understand good leadership. And he's a strong believer in constitutional democracy. And that's been very important for South Africa's trajectory since 1994, because of course there never was a democracy in the history of the country before that. And it's now under threat right across the world, not just from presidents like former President Trump and current President Putin, who threatened democracy and sought to override it and subvert it, but also in South Africa from many leaders who are attacking the judiciary and the constitutional court, which are the bedrocks of a democracy and establish the rule of law. So his belief in constitutional democracy is another sign of his greatness as a leader, as is his generosity. He was always insisting never hate anybody, though that's difficult for all of us, just in an emotional way from time to time in our lives, especially if you're in politics, and never humiliate your enemy, because he had this phrase about there is nobody so dangerous as one who is humiliated. So his belief in respect, even for your opponents and your enemies, but remaining resolute and tough and sticking to your principles nevertheless. And I end up on this other characteristic as a leader. I don't boast about the fact, but I have had the privilege to not just to become a friend of Nelson Mandela's, but also to meet leaders right across the world in my positions as a government minister, a cabinet minister, and in other roles that I've played in over half a century of politics. I've met kings and queens, including the British monarch. I've met presidents and prime ministers. I've met pop celebrities, rock stars, and sporting stars. I've never met anybody like Nelson Mandela, who is a people's person. He was a people's leader. He never lost his interest in people, however lowly was their station in life. And that is one of the things that I think marked his greatness, because leaders sometimes, under the pressures that they face, the clutching of the crowd, the pressures of having security around you, start getting distant and forget that they are just ordinary people like everybody else. Nelson Mandela never forgot that. He always had time for the cleaner in the hotel, the porter in the hotel, as I've seen at first hand. And he never forgot a friend and somebody that he knew. And that's another characteristics of great leaderships. So I end on that point and I hand back to you, Pamela, and thank you for having me on this important program and webinar.
Wouldn't you like to explore a country where two worlds intersect, where first world infrastructure meets an emerging market, where science and technology enjoy rapid advancement, a land where innovation creates a dynamic environment for growth, where a market of almost 60 million people provide you with the perfect springboard to access a continent of 1.3 billion people? Welcome to the future. Invest in South Africa.
Yes, thank you once more, Lord Peter Hain. And I was just saying that we owe you a big thank you that as a country, we are now able to send a rainbow nation of athletes to the United Kingdom from next week until the 8th of August. And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who want to hear more of Lord Peter Hain, he actually teaches at Gibbs Business School in South Africa, and he has been a visiting professor at the University of Witwatersrand Business School. So if you want to hear more of him, you can be able to connect with him through those South African institutes of higher learning. Lord Peter Hain, when you shared your thoughts and your reflections, you reminded me of what Nelson Mandela himself said when he said that what counts in life is not the mere fact that we lived. It is what difference we made in the life of others that will determine the significance of our lives. And I thought of this as you were sharing that you've never met anyone else like Nelson Mandela. And I think it was the same for me as well. As you are aware, Lord Peter Hain, that I received a scholarship from Nelson Mandela himself for me to study in the United Kingdom. And the moment he touched my hand and he shook my hand and he said, "You are my ambassador, you carry my name," I changed from that moment. I was never the same person. I then became determined to be able to take the baton from him in whatever small way that I can. And that is, as in essence, why I am even doing the work that I'm doing, to say, with him having passed on, let us carry on with the legacy. Let us carry on with what he stood for. I can be so passionate about Tata Nelson Mandela, but for the sake of time, let us move on so that we go to this surprise, ladies and gentlemen, that we had promised you, which is a respondent. This is somebody who has listened to the conversation that we have had, and he is going to come in and share his own reflections, his own perspectives based on what we have discussed so far. His name is Dr. Liaquat Ali Azam, and he is from Leading Like Mandela Leadership. And really where what he stands for and where he comes from is really in tune with the topic that we are discussing today. We are very fortunate that we are having a diverse and formidable speakers and respondents likewise. So let me tell you about who Liaquat is. He's the founder and chief executive officer of the Leading Like Mandela, which was established in 2012. And he's continuing on Nelson Mandela's leadership legacy, supporting sustainable development, social justice, and unleashing the human potential. He serves on both regional and international advisory committees, think tanks, and NGOs, focusing on transformation, leadership development and governance, sustainable development, indigenous knowledge, and human rights. Dr. Liaquat is a leadership and governance consultant, a strategist and executive coach, and his commitment to the development of South Africa and African continent is coupled with his leadership competences, his specialist skills and experience, which have resulted him working with senior thought leaders, engaging with heads of states, diplomats, senior business leaders, consulting and advising governments, and at ministerial and parliamentary level over the past 30 years. Over to you, Dr. Liaquat Ali Azim. What comes into your mind today after the reflections and the perspectives that have been shared so far?
Good day to all of our esteemed speakers. Thank you, Ms. Pumela Salela and Brand South Africa for hosting this important webinar, Leadership Through the Lens of Nelson Mandela. We were listening to our esteemed speakers, Mr. Kingsley Okeke from African Leadership, Baroness Verma, as well as Lord Peter Hain. And what was common in all of these speakers was the fact that, you know, each person has spoken, each speaker has spoken about the greatness of the leadership of Nelson Mandela, the universal appeal of his leadership style, and then the relevance in today's time. What I'd like to raise specifically, you know, we know that the world is undergoing a period of great transformation post the pandemic. We are dealing with various economic and social crises. We are dealing with instability on various levels, wars, as well as economic and other food security issues that the world is facing. We face as well issues such as climate change. And what can we learn from Nelson Mandela? Nelson Mandela's leadership style was one that was grounded in his identity. And this is what every leader needs to understand, that all leadership begins with self-leadership. We cannot lead others if we do not lead ourselves. And we cannot change the world, as Nelson Mandela said, if you do not begin by changing yourself. But yourself is understanding what is your identity. And Nelson Mandela's identity was grounded in the universal principle of the oneness of humanity. Nelson Mandela firmly believed and lived by this principle of oneness, and it is embodied in Africa. It is known as Ubuntu, which is I am because you are. And Nelson Mandela stated that your freedom and mine cannot be separated. He further went on to say that Ubuntu is a small but a big idea, and simple but big idea. And he stated that we are all branches on the same tree of humanity. And, you know, if leaders understand that principle, how do the branches of a tree, you know, fight with each other? Do they kill each other? No. We embrace each other, because as we grow together. And that's really that principle of oneness. He was a leader, a transformational leader, was able to bring about a transformation, just as the world is undergoing major transformation. But what are we transforming from, and what are we transforming to? Nelson Mandela was born in 1918. We celebrated his centenary in 2018. And really, where we launched the collaboration with the United Nations, with led by the keynote by Deputy Excellency, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Ms. Amina Mohammed, and various dignitaries. That essentially, 1918 marked the end of World War I. It was Nelson Mandela was born, and he ushered in an era of unity and peace. That is one of the greatest legacies that he has left, is one of peace and unity. And really, our speakers have mentioned this in each, but one requires to have the courage, as Lord Hain has mentioned, the courage to speak truth to power, to be able to bring about peace, but understanding that, Baroness Verma spoke about the resilience and the importance of bravery, and the fact that we live in an uncertain time, uncertainty. Hence, the only certainty we have is what is within us. Nelson Mandela was born at the end of the World War. World War I, back in an era of peace and unity, but coming from an era where it was divide and conquer to one of unite and rise and grow together. And that's really where we're at as a world once again. We are on a cusp where we can then transform to a unity consciousness, but it has to start from the leader themselves. So what were some of the key values that underpinned this? Was Nelson Mandela's values of justice, freedom, because the world is a reflection of ourselves. Peace has to begin within you. One needs to be at peace with yourself for you to be able to bring about peace in the world. And most of our leaders and many leaders who are very quick to utilize force as opposed to their inner power require great healing. Our speakers also spoke about the importance of healing as a world and really being honest with ourselves, going to introspect. Nelson Mandela in his time, remember what was the resources that Nelson Mandela had when he was in prison? Often leaders raise the issue that for us to be able to develop the world sustainably, we require certain resources. But the greatest resource that Nelson Mandela found was within himself. So this is really one of the key messages that we'd like to is how do we as leaders tap into the power and the resource we have within us and unleash that further. And key as well is being authentic, because that enables us to build trust. There should be transparency. Our speaker spoke about the ill and the cancer of corruption, and the importance that Nelson Mandela's leadership style was one of selflessness and sacrifice. As he mentioned, it was a cause that he was willing to die for. He was able to sacrifice his life for as well. Nelson Mandela has also lived with a sense of compassion. He was able to transcend the love of power with the power of love. And this is and when you come with that principle and that oneness and that compassion, you are able to transform the world. So, there's so much that we can learn from Nelson Mandela. The speakers have alluded to that, and really, as he has mentioned, it is in your hands now. Where you see such oppression, where you see challenges, it is in your hands. And I would like to close with that. But as he mentioned as well, that, beliefs are very important. Nelson Mandela mentioned it always seems impossible until it is done. So remember, to each one of you and great leaders, it is in your hands now, the future of creating a better world for all. I thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Dr. Liaquat Ali Azam. What you shared about us as humanity being part of one tree and asking the question, do the branches of a tree kill each other? That's quite poignant. So thank you for that. It's a call that makes us remember that as humanity, we really are all the same and we belong to one body. Thank you for your reflections, truly appreciated. We are moving on, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got any questions for any of the speakers, please type them in the chat. Any comments, questions, because after the second respondent, we are going to be taking your questions for any of the speakers. Now, our second respondent is Dr. Telela Ncetane Vika. She has a PhD, summa cum laude. She's a respected corporate governance and leadership scholar, management and social scientist, a legal scholar, and her research focuses on corporate governance laws, international trade laws, international money laundering laws, international human rights laws, and African women leadership frameworks and leadership development, equality, and justice. Dr. Telela has contributed a chapter in a book that has been commissioned by a UK scholar, Dr. Elizabeth Williams at the University of Edinburgh. And the forthcoming book is titled Nelson Mandela, Pulling the Branch of a Tree, The Impact of His Legacy on Black Britain, Race in Britain, and is published by Bloomsbury in the United Kingdom. It will be published in London, ladies and gentlemen, later in this year, 2022. And in her chapter, Dr. Telela Ncetane Vika, her chapter is titled The Impact of British Law on Mandela and his legal jurisprudence. And she brought in vigor and incisive analytical focus, which will shed light on pivotal events in Nelson Mandela's history, especially the connections between the global South and the global North. And she has also authored a biography titled Servants for All Seasons. And for those of you who are interested in her books, ladies and gentlemen, they are available on Amazon book distributors. So Dr. Telela, we're coming over to you. What are your thoughts and what are your reflections on what has been shared so far?
Good afternoon to all the speakers and colleagues and fellow panelists and everyone who has joined. Thank you so much, Pumela, for this opportunity. From you at the beginning, and Kingsley, and then Baroness Verma, and then Lord Peter Hain, and then to my fellow respondent, there are key themes that are permeating about President Mandela, who I define as the greatest and the finest luminary to come from the Southern Hemisphere, and indeed, as Peter Hain said, globally. So we're talking about that man, the Mandela of South Africa, you say, Peter Hain, and you describe him so beautifully. But let me start with Baroness Verma. Fundamentally, what she said about President Mandela, that President Mandela was a man of courage, because he said in his own words, courage is not the absence of fear, it is the presence of it. And I confer and concurring and I agree. And then as we go along, Pumela describes President Mandela as the man of the ages, a man who was perfect for his time. But then we discovered that he was even perfect beyond his time. And how do I say that? Because he gave scholarships to the like of Pumela, but we continue to examine his legacy. This is why we've got this session today, Leadership Through the Lens of Mandela. So he was a man for the ages. So the speakers are saying, what else did I hear? I hear that you're saying the Mandela of South Africa has got an enduring significance. His life, his role was seminal. This is why he allows us, even in his death, at this moment in history, with all the challenges we're having, to view leadership through his lens. And that on its own, ladies and gentlemen, it is remarkable. Many years he's passed, but this man, this great man, from the global south, this man from this continent of ours, which is beautiful Africa, he influences, he continues to do so. What else did I hear quickly? The incongruity between the ideal equal society we all desire and the one we live in that is filled with discrimination, inequality, wars, has led to the universal struggles of justice all over the world. No wonder, therefore, it is not surprising that in Britain, Mandela's name became synonymous with the Stephen Lawrence case, those who remember it, and his statue in London, a rallying point for the Black Lives Matter, as we saw recently. And what else then President Mandela is teaching us? The speaker has told us Mandela's leadership is teaching us many things, but I'll summarize a few because of time. And those are, what must we learn from President Mandela? This gem from South Africa, the Mandela of South Africa. But then the Mandela we realized actually belonged to the world. Mandela turned politics of hate to politics of forgiveness. I heard you saying so, Lord Peter Hain. Further, Mandela teaches us servant leadership, that it is not about us, it is about that which is bigger than us. What else President Mandela teaches us? He teaches us that it is important we summon our better angels, so that our bravery comes out from the better angels. Hence, Mandela's name is synonymous with wider struggles against myriad forms of discrimination and marginalized and oppressed people, not only in South Africa, the rest of Africa, Africa diaspora, but everywhere. You go to any corner in India, Mandela names reverberates in history. You go to any corner in the Americas, Mandela's name. You go anywhere, this beautiful name. And then lastly, the magic of Mandela continues. We call it here at home, the Madiba magic. it becomes beautiful. It becomes that we stand on its shoulders. It becomes that we are proud of. And when we stand anywhere in the world, we know that we had a Mandela who had fidelity to justice as one of his uppermost and enduring legacies. It became a balm not only to the democratic souls, but it becomes a balm to posterity. Hence, we look at this Mandela, the one we love, the one we adore, the one who has made so much things and was so proud. Mandela's dynamic leadership does not cling to power, but he notes that things come and go. And as things come and go, contexts change, so do people. Mandela accepted the processes of time. This is why then he said, it is in our hands. It is in your hands. Indeed, it is in our hands. We stand on shoulders of giants. And Mandela has lent himself, his legacy, his name, and all he stood for to us. And we've got nothing else but to do better and take lessons from him. And with that, I say, we salute him because we adore him and we thank him for all that he has taught us. And then Alan Busak says something very fundamental, that you see the difficulty with emulating Mandela, it is that he set a higher bar and it forces all of us to do better. But we have no option to learn. And every generation I knew, we have a duty to preserve humanity, not for our sake, but for the sake of our children and the future, and even the posterity that we don't see. But many years are projecting into it, and hopefully history will smile at this moment and say, Mandela didn't go to jail for 27 years for nothing. Generations after him are celebrating him, but not only celebrating him, they're emulating him, they're doing their part, and thank you so much.
Constitution is my responsibility. Being one of the best and most liberal legal documents in the world, it is the supreme law of our land. Therefore, it is my responsibility to protect our human dignity, to embrace inclusiveness of all, to unite us in our diversity, to protect our women against gender-based violence. Our Constitution enshrines our freedom. Be informed and empowered by our Constitution. Powered by Brand South Africa.
Thank you very much for that reflection, Dr. Telela Ncetane Vika. The question that I would like to ask the speakers and our respondents at large is, if Nelson Mandela was looking at the world today, let's say he's looking up at the world today, what do you think he would be saying? So I'm going to just give you a moment to reflect on this. In the meantime, here's a question from Alex. I think you should answer this one, Kingsley. It says, as we continue to learn about leadership, we unfold possible solutions in our world. My question majorly lies on the possibility of creating great leaders in Africa for the future. He says, how can we as a society, what can we do to fasten up the creation of leaders like Mr. Mandela all over Africa?
All right, thank you very much, Pamela, and for that, that's a very wonderful question, and it shows that most of those who have participated thus far have been listening and drawing from all the conversations that have been going on. I would like to quickly say, that in itself, it begins with us. The creation of replication of the likes of Mandela begins with each and every one of us. It starts from the home. It starts from what you say and do around your children. Remember, during my remark earlier, I had said that we have to pause and reflect on what we have done as leaders over the years. And we have to ask ourselves the critical question, are we living up to expectation or disappointing the past, the present, and the future leaders? I mean, the home for us as African is actually the first point of socialization and begins to shape what we know and do in our, from the cradle, eventually, of course, to our full bloom. So what you do from the home, what you do in school, what you do around those who are coming after you will largely determine whether we would have a continent, of course, because in context, it's talking about Africa. So building the next Mandelas from the cradle starts from the home. It starts from the school, And it starts, of course, from the workplace. And again, we must ask ourselves the critical questions as we take decisions and as we move forward. Every time you're faced with a challenge and every time you are called upon to make a decision, you ask yourself, what would the great Madiba, and I like the word that the last respondent had just said, he said, the Madiba magic. He said, what will the great Madiba do is faced with this same challenge? Of course, you will all agree with me that if we ask ourselves these critical questions, it would help us in making great and productive decisions in every situation we find ourselves. So again, three things. One, it starts from home. It starts from you and I. It starts from, of course, asking ourselves the critical questions when faced with a challenge or a decision. What will the great Madiba do in situations like this? I bet if we can do and imbibe these key qualities, we will, of course, make our continent and the world, of course, a better place. Thank you very much, Pamela.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kingsley. Now, there is a question for you, Dr. Telela. It is from Kosana. He says, what advice would you give the South African government and community-based organizations in developing their own educational system parallel with the South African Constitution, especially in Black abandoned communities?
Yes. Thank you for that question. That question is very complex. It has got many levels in it. There's education system, there's the constitutionality of it, and then there's abandoned communities, one would imagine maybe rural South Africa. Maybe the point of departure quickly, Nkosana, on that question, one of the most important things that we need to do and continuously we need to do is to look at knowledges of the global South, what we call Southern epistemologies. That's where our wealth in education belongs. That's where we need to dig deep. Because if we don't do that, Nkosana, we can build the most beautiful schools, we can do all those kind of things. But if the knowledge is from Africa, don't enrich a Black child, don't enrich a marginalized child, then that education will always not found itself seated well. There'll always be this, it wouldn't be solidified. I would start there. This is why it is important to have scholars of note who are preoccupied with creation of knowledge, so that you produce people who are thinkers, people from this global South. There's so much we can produce. Hence, I'm very delighted to see many scholars from JICA, from Oxford, from everywhere, because that's where we need. Education needs scholars, especially African intellectuals, have got a duty, a higher by duty. And we've got a model. Mandela talks to this a number of times, and the importance of education and what can education do to a Black child. It can empower, it can change situations of poverty, inequalities. It becomes the greatest leveler in life. I am a rural girl, for instance, but education has given me an opportunity to be on this improbable journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Telela. That is quite inspirational. I think this next question can be answered by Lord Peter Hain. Lord Peter Hain, there is a question here, and I'm throwing this question to you because at the age of 19, you became a British anti-apartheid leader, and you were really instrumental in even stopping all white South African sports tours. Now, the question here relates to the youth. Nokutula is asking, how do we make the youth of today relate to, and how do we make them own the legacy of Nelson Mandela? She's asking, what kind of a teenager was Mandela that made him have the thinking and that led to be the leader that he was? And you've even written a book on Mandela. So I think you're the best person to answer this one.
Well, I'm not sure whether I am the best person, but for what it's worth, I think he was brought up and in a way groomed as a youngster to be a chief in his clan of the Tembu people. And I think that he kind of, in a sense, assumed a leadership role from that training, but there was something in him, his background, his strength as a person, that gave him that particular quality. And as I said in my my remarks earlier, and others have emphasized that, including yourself, Pumela, it is also leaders who become arrogant and who think they're big and important and should stop listening to anybody else, and that they should simply be followed and listen to themselves, always start failing. And Nelson Mandela never stopped listening, in my experience, never stopped learning, never stopped being interested in the views of others, even if he disagreed, in which case he'd say so, sometimes strongly, but always with a sense of respect. So I think, I think that it was in his youth that he was expected to be a leader of his local, of his clan and of his local people, that may have encouraged his development as a person. But I don't think it really, the leadership, the political leadership really started to be expressed until he got involved in the Youth ANC in the late 1940s.
Thank you very much, Lord Peter Hain. I think this last question, there's lots of questions, but now due to time, we have to make this next question the last question. And Baroness, I'd like to reflect on this one. It's from Tak Kapalamula, and they're asking, how do we get our African politicians to embrace the Mandela magic? Who's a politician?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I think the thing is, every leader is going to be bringing their own leadership to their countries. I think the key, of course, is what Peter's just said. It's when leaders forget that they are the servant of the people and start to stop listening. And I think any leader who stops listening learns very, very quickly that people will not follow. I think today's generation of the populace is better informed, is better connected, needs more from their leaders, and that's why leaders have got to be prepared to answer to their electorate. I also think that it's really important that we don't become passive bystanders. All of us, and it's been said by Kingsley and others, all of us have a responsibility. Whatever we do, in whichever size, shape we do it, we have not got to wait for permission. We don't need somebody to tell us what's right and wrong. We don't need to have somebody tell us that we need to go out there and stand up for somebody else. Nobody told the great leaders that they had to stand up for other people. They had an instinct that they had a duty to their people. And I think that, good leaders across the world understand what their populations require of them. And the minute leaders stop listening, I'm afraid populations, particularly today, particularly the way we're connected, will actually respond rather strongly back.
Thank you so much. That will be the conclusion of our discussions. And I can see that we have to conclude as we are starting to all warm up. But I encourage you to have these discussions in your corners. And that question that I was posing to the panelists is a question that I am leaving each of you who has tuned in to answer. If Nelson Mandela was looking at the world today, what do you think he would say? Have those discussions amongst your friends, your groups, your communities, as it is important that we continue to reflect on the legacy of Nelson Mandela. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking our esteemed speakers, Lord Peter Hain, Baroness Verma, Mr. Kingsley Okeke, Dr. Telela Ngetane Vika, and Dr. Liaquat Ali Azam. And as we close, I would like us to just have a moment of silence for a foreign hero, Donato Francisco Matera, known as Don Matera. He's a South African poet and an author, and he passed away this week on Nelson Mandela's birthday, which was 18th of July. He was 86 years old. May we remember him. Just a moment. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And as a departing thought on this International Nelson Mandela Month, and in honor of the former president, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela's wonderful legacy and leadership and commitment to service, I would like to invite you to reflect on how you can be of service to yourself, how you can be of service to the community, how you can be of service to the nation, and how you can be of service to the world. And I leave you with a poem from the recently departed Don Matera. The poem is called Remember by Don Matera. He says, "Remember to call at my grave when freedom finally walks the land, that I may rise to thread familiar paths, to see broken chains, fallen prejudice, forgotten injury, pardoned pains. And when my eyes have filled their sight, do not run away for fright. If I crumble to dust again, it will only be bliss of a long-awaited dream that bids me rest when freedom finally walks the land." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your indulgence. Thank you for the gift of your time, and thank you for joining us today. Be on the lookout for more webinars from Brand South Africa. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ten reasons why you should invest in South Africa. Number 1, hot emerging market. Number 2, the number 1 diversified economy in Africa. Number 3, the largest presence of multinationals on the African continent. Number 4, progressive constitution and independent judiciary. Number 5, favorable market access to global markets. Number 6, abundant natural resources. Number 7, advanced financial services and banking sector. Number 8, world-class infrastructure and logistics. Number 9, young trainable labor force. And number 10, excellent quality of life.